Okay, let's finish watching the rest of this video. Let's actually like it as well. Alright, let's go.
Pretty obvious it seems to be the source of all the primordial water nonsense that's going on. And you know, the Hydro Archon's prophecy seems to reference Renee's original plans. So there's that. But we're not done yet. We still have one more quest to cover, and it is a shorter one, thankfully. So that whole conflict inside of Elenis that killed Renee and stuff, that was important for another reason, too. See, a bunch of the machines and mechas exploded during this confrontation with the Marashuse Phantoms, and the fragments of these machines cut into the dragon's
This is so weird.
And somehow this explosion created the entire race of Melazines.
I don't know
and
how
that
that's
is why
possible.
all Melazines are born with an
How?
odd mechanical token. These are fragments of the exploded people-dissolving machines that Renee made, as well as the Phantom's combat mechas. At least I'm assuming Renee had machines. I'm guessing. Okay. At the very least, it's part of the mechas. So that's the birth of the Melazines. As for the quest, it's pretty simple. We basically just followed a Melazine named Mamere who loved to paint, but whose paintings no one ever appreciated or understood except for the robotic dog named Seymour. And yes, that is the same dog that Elaine Guillotine made for his sister Marianne. Now, Mamere could hear the voice of her father, who we later learn is actually Elenis. And after we helped her out, she wanted to paint us something as a thank you gift, but was out of paint, so we helped her gather more material for paint. Only to later find out that the primary ingredient of Mamere's paints were her father's blood.
Oh!
You remember Jacob, yeah? Renee's best buddy, adopted brother, and accomplice in everything. Well, he has also been trying to collect the blood of Elenis in order to revive the dragon over the last 400 years. And that is also why he was after Mamere's paintings. Will he manage to do it? It's unclear. He apparently has enough blood to pull this off, but we got to talk to Elenis himself, and he doesn't seem to want to be revived, so who knows what'll happen there.
That's going to be interesting.
Quite the interesting character, because he's a Durin that we actually get to talk to. As you may recall, Durin was described as a horrifying dragon that brought untold destruction to Mondstadt during the Cataclysm, and Elenis was really no different. But if you read the lore of the Festering Desire and the Dragon Spine Spear, you kind of get a glimpse of the world through Durin's eyes. And the way he talks isn't what you'd expect of a mindless, destructive dragon. I mean, he calls Dvalin a lovely, tender lover when he tore through Durin's neck to kill him, and then he says he'll come back someday so they can sing and dance and play together.
Aww.
Really the mentality of something that goes around destroying everything. What we can say is that the way Durin saw the world and the way the world saw Durin were two very different things. And this carries over to both Elenis and all of the Melazines. Now, Elenis tells us that he didn't realize his expression of happiness was destroying the world around him and making everyone else suffer. So when he found all of this out, he became really sad and just super depressed. And then he kind of sort of made friends with Renee and Jacob, and later on...
Not really friends. Elenis was simply intrigued by them and felt less lonely when they were around. Aw, that's so cute.
Then he kind of sort of made friends with Renee and Jacob, and later on, when they died and everything exploded inside of him, suddenly Elenis had a bunch of kids, and also the breeding Primus, which Elenis describes as his soul.
Sounds really bad.
All of a sudden, Elenis is like, whoa, this is really cool, I can create stuff, I'm happy now. But you see the dichotomy of perspective here, right? Like, it's a big deal. It's even visible in the Breacher Primus, who are very violent to basically everyone except the Melazines, who think that they're, like, cute? And the Melazines keep them as pets? I mean, having unusual taste is one thing, but this is kind of on a different level. Although it's not exactly clear how different these levels of perception are until you do the Book of Esoteric Revelations subquest with Canatilla and travel to these ruins of the unified civilization that are floating in space under a shattered sky. Which, by the way, this is supposed to be like the future that Renee saw, supposedly. Like, this should be the apocalypse that he saw at the end of the world formula, but that's a side note. How we saw them, how the Traveler saw them, was just this horrible, tragic scene of ruin and destruction. But what Canatilla saw was
you saw the internet just die?
Forest and a beautiful garden. Where we saw Rift Hounds, she saw a cute puppy. And honestly, this made me wonder if Tevat is almost superimposed with another reality. If one side is destroyed and the other is beautiful, and then vice versa. And those who have special eyes who can see the quote-unquote truth, like the Melazines, see
I was
the
about to say
other
that.
reality, and not the one that most of Tevat perceives. And then that made me think about Kaya with like one eye being covered all the time. Like, does the other eye work, but it only ever
Right, okay, maybe. We could just do that.
sees like the other side, like that superimposed reality? And is that time like does the other eye work, but it only ever sees like the other side, like that superimposed reality? And is that actually what it's talking about, like in the book
Maybe.
about Fischl, like where she has one eye that sees the truth and then the other one doesn't? Like, is it the same thing? I don't know, but now I'm suspicious. Alternatively, it could be
Right,
something like
visualize
how
that?
in horror
Maybe not.
movies a protagonist will be starving and find a kitchen full of like delicious, freshly cooked food and then start eating, only for the illusion to finally wear off, and then they realize they were eating something they definitely should not have been eating, and then the kitchen wasn't clean at all, but like a cesspit of mold and decay. It reminds me of that, just a little bit. But then I also kind of wonder, like, knowing what we know about Elenis and Durin and like how they perceive things, if that same perspective applies to Rindauter's other creations, like the Rift Hounds. Like, do the Rift Wolves think they're actually playing with us like a dog would play fetch or whatever, but they're actually really hurting us? And
That's
on that
so
note,
sad
do
when you think
Hilichurls
about that.
see each other as normal humans, but then see us as monsters, and that's why they attack us? I know it seems kind of far-fetched, but the idea kind of messes me up inside. Speculation
Yeah, it
aside,
doesn't
if you
make me
do
feel
finish
good.
the quest and then help Mimere fix the robot dog Seymour, the dog will set out on a journey to find his owner, Marianne. And if you head to the headquarters for the Narcissenkoiz Ordo, you will run into both Anne and Seymour, who will have an amnesia-filled reunion that leaves the door wide open for future quests, which I'm very excited for. This is an optional thing to do, though, so if you haven't done it, go do it. It's very short, very heartwarming, and very sweet. And also, you get a lot of luxurious trysts, so that's cool. And the room is neat. I mean, that's where I'm sitting right now, in the, yeah.
Nice.
It's a cool place.
Oh my god, it's a
Come
big
find it.
desk.
Time to shift gears a bit now, though, and talk about some shared themes that might be relevant later on. Prior to 4.0, I kind of figured Scaramouche was right, and that Arlecchino was unstable, unhinged, and just batshit crazy. But after talking with Linny and reading his and Lynette's stories, and after reading some lines from Arlecchino herself on her kids' updated character cards,
She wants to
I'm
say
convinced
Fontaine.
that she's just an unhinged mama bear instead. Very protective over her kids, albeit still a kind of bit crazy because she did apparently murder the former head of the House of Hearth while she was a child, so no denying that. But I
Jesus.
think she might be more like an unstable mama bear. Like I said, like she gives mama bear energy, okay? Now, I believe, with no basis whatsoever, that Arlecchino will be put on trial and falsely accused of theft, likely of the Gnosis. If the Oratrice ends up being a Gnosis-powered machine, then her investigation into it would therefore make sense. And if the Gnosis ends up missing, that means we'd have a trial without the Oratrice.
Ooh,
Now, why does
very
this matter,
interesting.
you might wonder, and why am I specifically choosing theft as the crime? Without confusing this section too much, the Narcissenkoiz Institute is full of Alice in
Justin,
Wonderland
you're right, just
references.
take it out of
The achievement
friggin'
you get
Fiona's
for completing
chest.
it is even called Anne in Wonderland, and the Nymph Stream artifact set talks about a fell dragon over and over and over again that it later names the Jabberwock, which is from a poem in Alice and Wonderland where a young hero slays the monster with the holy sword. The kids at the Institute play act this story all the time, and the Nymph Stream set talks about how the role of the dragon or hero can be switched, depending on the viewer's perspective. Now, Renee was often described as the hero of these tales, but by the end of the Nymph Stream artifact set, he was described as the dragon, making him the Jabberwock, the monster, and the villain of the story. And that's very fitting because it's his work that matches the prophecy of destruction that Agaria left behind. So will Renee make an appearance? Well, we'll do a deep dive in a separate video, but that would make Arlecchino the hero, but from a different perspective, you could call her the monster. You see what I'm trying to say here? Like,
Yeah.
the monster and the hero are kind of interchangeable, and it is a matter of perspective. Now that
I agree.
aside,
Yeah.
in the Alice in Wonderland books, the Knave, which is also Arlecchino's codename, is put on trial by the Queen of Hearts and is then falsely accused of theft. The Mad
Oh.
Hatter, who has also been put on trial for murder, well, murdering the time, but whatever, he's called to defend the Knave. The Mad Hatter in this case should be Linny, with Lynette as the March Hare and Fremine as the Dormouse, since Linny was the one put on trial for murder earlier in the past, and would be available to defend the Knave since he's her successor, and also because Child is in jail. And I don't think that the Traveler will try to defend it, but maybe, who knows. In this trial, the judge is the King of Hearts, who in this case is Nouvellette. Whereas Farina should be the Queen of Hearts, who's leading the prosecution of the Knave because the Knave stole something of hers. In the books, it's the Queen of Hearts' tarts. In Genshin, it should probably be the Gnosis.
No, yeah.
Right? Eventually, the Knave is found innocent, but a verdict is never properly reached because Alice throws a fit. But this would end up lining up with a verdict never properly being reached in Genshin because either the Oratrice isn't functioning because it's missing its Gnosis, or the trial is interrupted by something big and nasty.
Ooh.
Another Harbinger? Different objectives from Arlecchino. Listen, there is no
wonder when
possible
Arlecchino come
way
into it.
that
Maybe Act
Arlecchino
3.
and Child are the only
Or Act
Harbingers
4.
in Fontaine. We've
Act
only
3, I'll say.
dealt with 5 out of 11 Harbingers so far, I think, right? We've dealt with Child, Scaramouche, Signora, kind of Dottore, and now Arlecchino. We haven't met anyone else in person. So there's no way it's only these 2 here. And I will present my theory on what I think is going to happen in its
who else do you think?
But for now, given how I believe that Arlecchino's presence in Fontaine is a reference to the Knave that went on trial and how deeply connected Alice in Wonderland is to the Narcissenkreuz Institute, and the fact that Arlecchino literally runs an orphanage that regularly creates super elite soldiers, many of whom seem like they're the results of some unethical experiments, it makes me wonder if she may be more intricately connected to the Narcissenkreuz Institute. She is from Fontaine, after all. She's native, and it also appears that she's mostly human, except for her black hands and striking eyes. So it makes you wonder if she wasn't also the subject to some questionable experiments at some point, and if it was based on Renee's work. And I don't think it's a coincidence.
That cutscene was so good.
A neo-human, just like Jacob, is the Harbinger that's present in Fontaine. Well, I think that just about does it for the quest recaps, but I have a bunch of little observations and tidbits that I want to share, so it's time once again for all my miscellaneous mini theories and observations, starting off with the chasm. When you're in the prophecy area, if you turn back and look around through the portal that you came from, you'll see an area that matches the room Halfdan died in back in the chasm.
Oh!
If you recall, the water from the upside-down fountain in that room brought peace to the ever-suffering Dainsleif, and the Abyss Lector that we found there thought that the water there might be able to be used to undo the curse of the people of Conria. In light of new knowledge, these waters might actually have been waters of the primordial sea. Since the primordial waters flow upwards, and the chasm fountain is upside down. Moving on, I just kind of want to talk
that's
about
actually
Farina
interesting.
for a second. Farina is really an interesting character as far as Archons are concerned.
Yes!
Just don't let her
I love her so much,
persona fool you. This Archon is incredibly insecure, horribly lonely, and a bit cowardly, and she's very scared and under a lot of unwanted pressure. I say cowardly because although she talks a good game, when given the chance to show her raw power in combat or otherwise, she gets really nervous and sputters some excuses onto why she can't do it, so she just kind of like backs out, you know? I call her scared because she sought the Traveler out first. I see this as an attempt to gain the upper hand as quickly as possible.
But the Traveler drew his sword.
Vast information network, and she's heard that in every nation that the Traveler visited, massive upheaval changes have taken place.
True.
I personally think she's terrified of the prospect that the arrival of the Traveler could trigger the beginning of this prophecy that was left by her predecessor. Now, as for the rest of this claim, well, she kind of just says them all herself. At the midway point between Acts 1 and 2, if you go into the Fountain of Lucine, you can actually hear her.
Yeah, I see so many shorts. Applause. It's insane.
How much longer?
So, yeah.
Such a good Easter egg,
Doreen is
though.
really just a scared kid putting up a really strong front. She's definitely a lot less mature than Nahida, in any case. Speaking of maturity, though, let's talk
Which is
a little
funny.
bit about Nouvelette.
It's
I'll
funny.
just say it. I think Nouvelette is the Hydro Dragon taken human form, and I really doubt many will disagree with.
Yes, okay, so I didn't really agree with that first, but when I watched Brandon Lyon's a reaction to Act like 1 and 2, I was convinced. Like, at the end of it, I'm convinced now. Like, I'm convinced after watching Brandon Lyon do Act 2.
With me at this point. Obviously, there's that whole thing at the start of the Archon quest where Fremine tells us about the legend that says the Hydro Dragon's mood affects the weather, and through Acts 1 and 2, we see Nouvelette's mood suspiciously corresponding to the rain. He is
The one in Bob Parker say is like, during a trial, it's also raining. But is he sad during a trial? I don't see him sad in a trial. So that part doesn't work with me. It's like, if it rains during a trial and Nouvelette doesn't look sad, then why is it raining? That's just me, but maybe he is sad. Maybe he is. I don't know.
surprisingly empathetic
Oh,
and likely feels down after every
But every
trial,
other part makes sense. Every other part
which
makes
is
sense.
why on most days there's a trial, it rains. He also has those slit pupils akin to
Wait.
empathetic and suspiciously corresponding to the rain. He is surprisingly empathetic and likely feels down after every trial, which is why on most days there's a trial, it rains.
But it's
He also
during
has
as
those
well.
slit
And after.
pupils akin to all other dragons and bishops. And he weirdly fits this riddle from Volume 5 of the Byakuya-koku Chronicles. That's really hard to say quickly, I'm sorry. It says, what walks on 4 feet in the early morning, 2 feet during the day, and 3 feet at night? And then it presents the answer as a bishop who transforms into a person to attend a ball, then breaks one of its legs and eventually ends up walking with a cane. I don't think Nouvelette has broken a leg, but
No.
the Masquerade Ball does fit Fontaine, as it's the chapter titled Masquerade of the Guilty. And if he is the Hydro Dragon, then he would be a bishop in human form that uses
And it also makes sense why he doesn't have a vision or a constellation.
a cane. The explanation for this riddle then goes on to talk about an old prophecy which says the Dragon of Water will descend in the form of a human. His intro text also references a Bible verse, Job 41:34, which talks about the Leviathan, which these days is what we call giant sea serpents. I also have this ongoing theory that dragons in Genshin usually have a dwarven counterpart that they're named after or share traits with. Durin and Dvalin are explicit, because those are actually names of dwarves, but Nouvelette obviously isn't. But this guy also looks just like Fontaine's otters, and that's when I realized
True.
that Otter was actually the name of a noteworthy dwarf. Otter's story basically involves him shapeshifting into an otter and then being murdered by Loki, who tried to get out of his punishment but got punished more
Jesus.
each time he tried. But the overall moral of the story turned out to be something along the lines of how important it was to adhere to the laws and the consequences set therein. This seems like a really fitting theme for Nouvelette, so I'm gonna take it. I will expand upon this idea one day.
Interesting.
I'll do it. But I have a second Nouvelette theory, and it involves Egeria. For an Archon, Egeria was particularly sympathetic to the dragon race, and that makes me think that she may have befriended them, possibly going so far as to take one as a consort. In this case, it would be Nouvelette. Now I say this because in mythology, Egeria was the consort of the second...
Censorship? I love that.
Now I say
The bird.
this
That's
because
fine.
in mythology, Egeria was the consort of the second king of Rome, Numa Pompilius. Given that ancient Fontaine is based on Rome and the first king was Remus, Nouvelette being Numa seems to hold some water here. Myth goes that
Water, get
Numa
it?
recorded Egeria's words in books, the contents of which established the original framework used for laws and justice in Rome. Numa then took these books to his grave only to have them unearthed 500 years later. When I read that, I immediately pictured a Hydro Dragon learning from the Hydro Archon the concept of law and justice. and who was
But
only able to
nothing to do
pass
with
them
actually humans.
off to Agaria's successor, Farina, after 500 years or so. Because let's face it, Neuvillette is the only one with any real power in Fontaine right now, not Farina, so I don't feel like the whole thing got passed on to her just yet. And maybe it's just me, but Neuvillette really feels like
I want to see her powers. I really want to see her powers. Like, even when Chad was transforming into his foul legacy transformation, Farina was the one that was just shocked and just standing there, while Neuvillette was the one that actually did something and knocked him out in one hit. So I feel like either she doesn't have good control of her powers are really weak right now, or she's, too scared to show her powers and show everyone how strong she is or how weak she is type thing. I don't know.
awkward father
Yeah,
trying to prepare
weird.
his spoiled, unruly child for
It's
a
weird.
world of real responsibilities, while, kind of doing her homework for her. Plus, and this is absolute crack, I swear, but, while their
Yes.
personalities are quite off, Farina and Neuvillette bear some design similarities to GGZ, Kiana, and Siegfried, making me wonder if Siegfried is supposed to be a reference to Neuvillette in some ways, and that would make Agaria Cecilia and Kiana Farina. This idea gains a little bit more merit outside of the crack when you realize that Siegfried and Cecilia were both from very special bloodlines, and the merging of these two bloodlines created a very special holy maiden,
Aww.
Kiana. The mixing of a demon god and a dragon kind of mirrors this idea, and it's something that Hoyo does a lot in their games, so I'm not gonna call this completely impossible yet. And before you ask, yes, he is at least several hundred years old in his human form anyway, so this is all viable. Speaking of dragons,
Yes.
let's talk slugs. Melazines appear to be based off of sea slugs, specifically sea bunnies. And this firmly establishes the pattern of draconic things being related to sea slugs in Genshin, like how Dvalin is most certainly based off of a blue glaucus.
Oh,
and
wow,
seals
yeah.
are based off of Cleones. Ajdaha is obviously a little bit more toadish. I can't really justify him, but it's still kind of somewhat aquatic. But the Warden of a Pep looked like it could be something more like a, like a Melibe viridis, if I'm saying that right.
It looks
Doesn't
weird,
Latin
but yeah,
sound
sure.
good? It doesn't. I know. It's fine. I'm gonna practice, I promise. But I'm starting to think that there might be more to the whole primordial sea thing in the literal sense when both your god creatures and dragons have the same real-world inspirations in slugs. I really can't wait to see what ends up as a frosted nudibranch, though, because those things are really pretty. Maybe
Look,
they'll be
looks
the
cool.
cryo dragon. They'll be like somewhat transparent. That'd be so cool.
Oh, that
I
would
have
be
no
cool.
clever segue here, so here, let's just talk about indemnitium.
The
This
pyro
stuff is a type
dragon.
of energy that the Oratrice produces by distilling people's faith in trials and the justice system. The word indemnity means a sum of money paid out in compensation, which basically means that indemnitium is your legal fees converted into energy. Now, something I vaguely recall is Venti saying that gods get power from people's belief. And if that's actually true and not just him spitballing, then in theory, Farina is knowingly weakening herself if she's collecting that power of belief through the Oratrice and using it to power the city instead. Which might explain
She's
why
sacrificing
she shies
herself.
away from physical conflict.
Nice.
She might actually be kind of weak. Well, like, in lore, Like, I'm pretty sure she's gonna be busted when she comes out as a playable character. Like, that's
1 million.
just gonna happen. It does seem like
Actually,
this
no, that's possible. 40 million
power
times.
source is becoming less and less reliable, though. And I do wonder if
Yeah.
that's because Farina has made the courtroom a type of theater, so people take it less seriously. Otherwise, there would be no reason to research the Pneumacia reactors as a secondary power source. It's not like they can really use it anyway since it's completely unstable. It's kind of reminiscent of nuclear energy in its infancy, but it's food for thought nonetheless. You know what else is food? Salsa, but not this salsa because this is someone's name. So I made a video a while back that explored this idea of Piero not being ranked
I've done
number
2 of
1 of the
the
Fatui
quests.
Harbingers, but instead number 0, or like just the director. Is actually what the theory was. I didn't actually say number 0. I just said he was like the director, but so he wasn't number 1. He was like outside, but whatever. And if that was the case, then that meant that there was one Harbinger who we had never seen before and never heard of before. I
Pierre.
will leave a link to that video in the description if you're interested, but there's something kind of interesting in Fontaine that also adds some weight to the idea of Piero being number 0, and it involves Salsa. Salsa is this little kid and a member of the 3-man Alliance of Artists to overthrow the evil organization and protect the future of Fontaine club, I guess. The first two members are the Traveler and Paimon, and are therefore numbers 1 and 2. Salsa then states that because she was the founder, that she should be number 0.
Oh?
This definitely feels like a hint from the writer, since the Fatui are the only other numbered organization in the game, I think. But now I wonder if I'm right about who the unknown Harbinger is or was. And if I'm not, who could it be?
I still have a theory that maybe Lamine is training to be a Fatui Harbinger, but that's like stupidly crack theory. But I don't know, it'd be funny if Lamine was like training in the Abyss, like as an Abyss prince, just to join the Fatui. Or she is a part of the Fatui. That'd be so funny. That'd be such a good twist. I don't know. That'd be awesome.
Okay, I think that's all for
It's a crack
for
theory.
reals
It's a
today.
massive
I actually
crack
wrote 2 theories before I even sat down to write this recap summary video, so there should be... I should give you a pretty good idea of how inspiring I have found this region so far. It's very inspiring.
It's
There's
so
some
good.
fun stuff.
Fontaine's probably one of the best ones.
Now, while the names of my honorary French channel members scroll by across the screen, I am gonna talk about Child's Whale, I guess, because someone asked me to. I had no thoughts on it until they made me think about it, so here goes, I guess. So you remember how I said Nouvelette was the Leviathan, or like at least referencing it? Well, as it turns out, one of the oldest species of sperm whale is called the Leviathan, which is named after the Leviathan. Are they the same thing in Genshin? No, probably not. But I think it's curious to put an emphasis on it now, and then show a giant shadow in the waters when Fremine is diving, and then also the giant shadow way back at the beginning of Inazuma with like that one scene that never happened with the Traveler underwater. Now, Child is named after Ajax, which is a real-world mythological character, but also a mythological figure in Genshin who sailed a ship into the belly of a whale and then fought a dragon, maybe to save his love, Snegorochka? I'm butchering that one too, I'm so sorry. This appears to mimic the myth of Cetus, a giant sea monster or whale that Perseus killed to save Andromeda. And if you've watched my video on Child, where I proposed that he was related to Parsifal, then you would also know that Parsifal is another word for Percival, and I think Hoyo is not above making a pun out of the names Percival and Perseus. I really don't. I think that's something they would do. Hoyo also really loves cosmic whales and prominently displays one on the Astral Express and Honkai Star Rail, and they also call the ancient monsters of old in that game Leviathans, so I think this might be an ongoing multiverse theme. I'm not really sure. Was that anything definitive about Child's Whale? No, probably not, but that's okay. That's what I got.
Yeah.
And that is all I have for me today, guys.
It's cool to think that the reason why Child, the reason why Child's attack is a whale is because of like, was it like a dream that he had, but he can't forget it. So that move takes the shape of the whale because he can't forget that dream or that thing or that whale thing that he saw, which was actually really interesting. It was like, wow, so he can probably think of anything and he can make it into like a water attack. But since the whale's so prominent in his mind, that he can, which is cool.
Hour long, nearly. I'm like 6 minutes short, but thank you all so much for watching if you're still here. And please stick around the channel because there are theories in this pipeline that made my head spin when I was writing them, so I cannot wait to see your reactions to them.
Oh gosh.
Anyway, take care, guys. I am losing my voice. I will catch you all in the next video. Hopefully it'll be back by then. Bye!
Don't tell me she did this in all one take. Not one take, but Jesus Christ. But Ashikai videos are so good. The theories are so good. I do need to watch the Cat in Blue Hat one as well. That is one that I'll need to watch. But man, Fontaine has been so interesting. Like, oh my god, Fontaine. I cannot wait for Act 3 and 4 in for 4.1 to see if and see what happens, and see where we meet the knave / Arlecchino / father. I cannot wait to see what the fuck would happen. Like, I am so and I'm end with Child feel guilty. I cannot wait to see everything. God, Fontaine has been like one of the best regions. Oh my god.